Okay, so we're going to continue with our lecture over 17.2. So looking at the start of the war and the European theater. I did include some of Winston Churchill's quotes. This was his moment of glory throughout this war, but by the end, he's going to be voted out of office. So the power of France is over. I expect the Battle of Britain is about to begin. So the Battle of Britain is one of the most critical battles of the war for a couple of reasons. When you look at what was Hitler's plan, he was wanting to actually do an all-out land invasion, but he knew he was going to have to take care of the Royal Air Force in order to do that. So this became known as Operation Sea Lion. And what he was sending his Air Force to do, the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, was to go in and destroy the Royal Air Force, or RAF. And the plan was to actually go in and attack the planes and the air bases, and to attack the planes when they're on the ground. Winston Churchill, we watched yesterday his speech about, we will fight on the beaches, we'll fight everywhere, we're going to fight alone if we have to. He definitely does emerge as that inspirational leader during this war. One of his quotes, "Fear is a reaction, courage is a decision," and he will maintain being this inspirational speaker throughout the war and even during the Cold War. He is going to be so good at his speeches that he will convince our president, President Truman, to run up this document, the Truman Doctrine, and go after communism and Stalin and everyone else. So with this plan on destroying the Royal Air Force, and again, they needed to bring down the Royal Air Force in order to have that invasion, that land invasion. And they almost had it, but then the British Air Force actually responded. They went and bombed Berlin. Well, that was a little different than what the Germans were doing. The Germans were not striking any civilian areas when they first were attacking at the Battle of Britain. They went to the air bases and they were striking the planes so that the planes would be too damaged, and then they couldn't come up and stop them when they led their invasion, because they needed to have superiority in the air, and they needed to be able to get over into England. But England's response was, we're going to bomb Berlin. That's not an air base. So they saw that was a little bit different. And then Hitler orders, well, you know what? We're going to bomb London. So then civilians started to fall under the attack. The Royal Air Force is able to recover, and what's going to help them and actually give them the upper hand is this new radar system. And they refer to it as the dotting system, and that's because of Sir Hugh Dotting. He's the commander-in-chief of the Royal Air Force Fighting Command. He was using this new radar system to help detect the enemy planes when they were coming in. So that actually gave them this advantage, and it gave them the ability to defend Great Britain from the attacks. And here we have Churchill's quote, "Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few," because the Royal Air Force was able to protect Great Britain. And in the end, Hitler does call off his plan to invade Great Britain. Ooh, that sounds like someone else in history that had to call off their plan on invading Great Britain. Then it was Napoleon against the Navy, and this time it was Hitler against the Royal Air Force. Now, when you look at the Battle of Britain, it is very significant, where, we started this off saying that it was one of the most critical battles. For one, and I don't have it listed on here, but it was very significant in the fact that Hitler was not able to invade Great Britain. He wasn't able to destroy the Royal Air Force, which means he can be defeated. Up until this point, everything else has easily fallen under his control. He's been able to take every single thing that he wants. I mean, my goodness, France fell in less than 6 weeks. But here, Great Britain stood strong. The Royal Air Force was able to hold them off. They were using new technology, and Hitler was stopped. He could not invade Great Britain. It also sets him up in the future where he might have to fight a two-front war. And we know what happens when you get into that two-front war. You're going to have to split your resources. You're not going to be able to focus everything, and things are not always going to go to the way that you want. It's not going to go to your advantage. And what is also going to be significant when we get further into this war, D-Day will launch from Great Britain. So since Great Britain has not fallen, we're going to be able to continue with using that as a launching point, as kind of like a home base, in order to figure out how we're going to get onto the continent and start to force the Germans back toward Germany. So Germany is headed in a different direction. Now, this doesn't mean that they just stopped bombing London or stopped bombing Great Britain, because they're going to continue to do that. Because as we venture further into this war, we know that total war, that's happening. And one of the big things about total war, particularly in this particular war, is that we need to destroy the citizens' morale. And that's going to be the focus on Great Britain for Germany. Keep bombing them, keep bombing them, keep bombing them. Because eventually they're hoping that the civilians would just become so devastated with what's going on that they would demand that their government surrender. But we saw Churchill's speech. We saw how Parliament rallied behind him, even the side who was not supportive of him in the beginning, the opposing political party. But we are definitely going to see in this war between Great Britain and the Soviet Union, the people are not going to give up. What we will also see in this new direction for Germany is the tripartite, this pact that Japan is now going to be added to the Rome-Berlin axis. So now we have our three nations in this mutual defense and military support, the Axis powers. So now we have our three countries that have to be brought down: Italy, Germany, and Japan. Now, we saw in our video on Mussolini, Italy is not a strong military nation. So really the two countries that are really going to have to be brought down is going to be Germany and Japan, because those two are two military powerhouses, and we have seen them in action. Italy didn't even join or declare war during World War II until France had fallen, because then they were like, oh, okay, the only one left is Great Britain, so I might as well jump on the bandwagon, because then I can get some spoils of war, and you really didn't want Hitler on your bad side. So they agreed to declare war right when they thought this was going to be over, because we know Mussolini was not wanting this war. So now, since he cannot go after Great Britain, he can't invade Great Britain, Hitler then sets his sights on the Soviet Union. So in June of 1941, Germany invades the Soviet Union. And please note this date, June. We're in warm weather. We're in the summer months. We have seen time and time again when we have these military invasions in Russia, now in the Soviet Union, that these are people who are very confident in their abilities. They believe that time is on their side, that everything else has come easy for them, and now they're just going to go in there, they're going to take down the Russian people, the Russian land. And now in the 40s, we're looking at the Soviet Union, which is the same country, just different name. And we know what happens. They're underestimating the Soviet Union. They're there in warm weather. They're going to get sucked in, and they're going to be stuck there in winter. Same thing's going to happen here. We are going to spend more time on the invasion of the Soviet Union a little later, but we're just covering just kind of like a brief information here. We talked yesterday about scorched earth. So that policy where they destroy everything, burn everything down, destroy your livestock, because you do not want your enemy to have anything, any kind of resources to use in order to survive on your land. Because, with now, Germany's going to have to get supplies over to their troops. Eventually, they're going to be stuck in that two-front war. And actually, it's also pulling their enemy in. The further you can get them in, the longer they're going to be staying there. And old Russian winter is coming, and they're not going to be prepared for it. With this scorched earth policy and destroying everything and anything of value as they start to move further into the Soviet territory, they end up destroying and disappearing thousands of towns. So when the German army gets there, it's like, okay, where are the resources? And then that's going to become an issue later on in the war. Where are the resources and how are they going to survive? By winter, the Germans are at the gates of Moscow. They have also laid siege to Leningrad, and we will go further into Leningrad because it's going to be a 900-day siege. And we'll see the devastation that's going to be brought upon Leningrad. We will also talk a little later about a turning point in the battle here in the Soviet Union, and that's going to be the Battle of Stalingrad, because there are two places that should never fall to the Germans. That's going to be Leningrad, hence the name. It's named after Lenin. It used to be St. Petersburg, and then Stalingrad, because you're not going to hand over Stalingrad to the Germans. And the Soviet Union, this war will be called the Great Patriotic War of the Fatherland. So when you're looking at it from that mindset, you are not expected to allow them to lose. You are to continue fighting the Germans to the death. I had mentioned yesterday about the Atlantic Charter that it's going to seem very similar to what we saw with Woodrow Wilson's 14 points. And we know that when Woodrow Wilson presented this before our Congress, and then he brought these ideas with him to the Paris Peace Conference, they were not exactly accepted, particularly by France. France went through a devastating portion of World War I and also having the issues from the Franco-Prussian War. But this time around, we have the U.S. president and the British prime minister coming together, and they are setting out an agenda. What needs to be done? What should be our focus when this war is over? Now, notice that they are secretly meeting. And this is taking place after the invasion of the USSR, because prior to that invasion of the Soviet Union, it was Great Britain out there hanging on, fighting against the Germans, and it looked like the Germans and the Soviets were just going to be buddy-buddy and agree never to attack each other. But we knew that was not the case. There was going to be an attack in the East. Now you have Germany fighting the Soviet Union, and you know that he's not going to give up on Great Britain. There's going to be that conflict between those nations. So you have Roosevelt and you have Churchill, and from here on, I will probably refer to Roosevelt as FDR, meeting secretly because they're working out this plan. And the United States, we're isolationists. We're supposed to be neutral here. So why is our president secretly meeting with the British prime minister? Well, under the Atlantic Charter, what they decide, and they are making this decision once they have defeated the Axis powers. And, they're setting it. Their mind is set. They're going to defeat the Axis powers. There would be no territorial changes. So we're not going to go and start carving up Europe like it was done previously. Remember all of the new countries that were created at the end of World War I. We're not going to go that route. We're also going to uphold self-determination. So the people's will be followed. This is Roosevelt and Churchill. These two men making this agreement. Notice that no one else is here, but someone else is going to have to agree to this if he wants assistance. They also will say that needs to be a permanent system of general security, that there needs to be this organization that will be created that would make sure that everything stays intact. And if it's not, then that group needs to go in and address it and fix it and stop whatever's going on. That organization will be called the United Nations. And it will replace the League of Nations. And we'll see a little later exactly how that United Nations is going to work out, because that permanent system of general security will have a permanent set of members of their Security Council. And those permanent members of the Security Council are not always going to get along. They also have addressed in the Atlantic Charter that they need to uphold free trade and freedom of the seas. That was something that they, as two nations that are embraced in capitalism, and particularly when you look at England and how they are set up with their trade routes, they need that openness. They need the ability to trade without being attacked, without losing access to those trade routes. However, we do know that one thing that the British had to give up was that monopoly on these trade routes that they've exclusively had for a long time. It had to be open. We wanted access. If they want our help, we get all out access to those items. So as we progress through this war, this Atlantic Charter becomes that model of what they want the world to look like when the war is over. And for any nation that wants to join in with the Allies and work with them, they will have to agree to these parameters. They have, particularly, no territorial changes. That's going to be a tough one, big tough one, because they need to bring in a third person here. And that third person has plans for Eastern Europe, and particularly he wants his buffer. So the U.S. becomes financially involved. We're financially involved. We are not sending troops at this time. So we're looking here at, we get the Lease Act passed in 1941. So our government, we have agreed that we will provide money and supplies, whether it's military supplies, medical supplies, whatever is needed to keep the British and the Soviets to stay in this fight against the Germans. With the Lend-Lease Act, we are not neutral any longer. We have picked a side. We are not physically fighting in this war in Europe, but we have picked a side. And, it's a lease. We do expect some things in return. We are loaning things out and we are leasing it, but we have chosen a side. And we know by choosing that side, eventually we are probably going to get pulled into what's going on in Europe. We need to make sure that the British and the Soviet Union can stay strong enough to defeat Germany. Okay, this will end our notes for this portion of the European theater and section 2. I want to remind you that you should be reviewing your notes and your terms and questions from 17.1, those steps toward war. You should be reviewing your terms and questions from 17.4 and going over those stages of the Holocaust and those acts of resistance during the Holocaust. And now we've added 17.2. As I've said multiple times, this is a large unit, so you need to be reviewing periodically every day to keep this stuff fresh. All right, so that is it.